So my advice for you going forward would be to pledge to yourself that you are not going to fake it again, because you've seen yourself where that leads. And a very personal share here, I had been somebody who had fallen into that people pleasing. I would find in the first few months of a new relationship, orgasms were happening and it was all good. But then maybe there would just be one time, this is before I became a sex coach and knew everything I knew now, where it wasn't really working for me. But I would think, oh, he'll think there's something wrong if I don't orgasm. And there isn't anything wrong. He's doing everything right. It's my fault. I'd start feeling bad. So I'll fake it just this once because I don't want to have a conversation about why didn't I? And I don't want him feeling bad. And then once you've done it once, it gets more and more tempting to do it again and again. And as you've said, then you're in a downward spiral where he thinks it's working. At what point do you say, well, it's not working?
Welcome to the Heartbreak to Happiness show with Sara Davison. If you're struggling with a breakup and you feel shocked, angry, betrayed, devastated, or sad and alone, then this podcast is for you. Best-selling author and award-winning host Sara Davison shares how you too can get on with your life to heal, grow, and move from heartbreak to happiness. Here's your host, Sara Davison.
Welcome back to the show. Now today I am super excited because my guest, Ruth Ramsay, is an adult sex educator and a coach, and she's on a mission for sexual energy to be recognized as a force for good. Now, Ruth has had a TEDx talk, Revamp Your Sex Life in 6 minutes, and it's had over 3.4 million views, and she's often in the UK press as well. So I am super excited to welcome Ruth Ramsay to the show. Welcome, Ruth.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me on. I've been enjoying listening to some of your back issues in prep for this appearance.
Oh, well, thank you for doing that. I'm super excited to have you. Now, this is a really interesting topic. I mean, sex is something that for some people they talk about freely. For other people, it's a really difficult topic to talk about, whether it's, for ourselves, with our kids, with, it just has so many taboos and stigmas for some people, but also other people like you, very comfortable talking about it. So I do think it's a really big topic of conversation, relevant for everyone that listens to this, because going through a breakup, obviously, you're kind of going through a lot of change. So I'd love to pick your brains on that. But before we get into that, I'd love to understand your story about how did you get to be an adult sex educator and coach?
Well, for me, I always say that I've been working with sexual energy for now about 23 years. So when I was a small girl, my two dreams were either to be a striptease artist or to be a journalist writing about sex and women's issues for the big women's magazines. I'm 50 now, so I was growing up at the time, as you'll remember, that the women's magazines had such power. So I did a journalism degree. I was working towards that ambition of writing for the magazines, and indeed working as a journalist on a fashion business website when I saw an advert for London School of Striptease, which was new at the time. And I thought to myself, well, obviously, I'm never going to become a striptease artist, but let's just go and explore this fantasy. I absolutely loved it. I found I had a talent for it, and I did indeed become a striptease artist. And then for 12 or so years, I was dancing, but I was also using my journalism experience to write about sex and sexual issues, became involved in activism for the rights of people working in adult entertainment, but wider than that. So the sexual rights of people typically denied that. So, for example, people with disabilities. And I just became very passionate about this idea that sexual energy should and can be a force for good, not a force of fear and shame and everything that it's that we're taught it is so often in our upbringings. So I did that. I had a great time and did that for just over a decade. But then stepped out of it because the industry was changing a lot. And I was getting towards my 40s and needing something else to do. But also I met and married my husband. And to be with him meant moving out of London, and it was difficult to carry on dancing with that situation. And so I had some years out of it, but I just desperately missed working with this topic. I'm so passionate about it. It's very much where I feel at home. As you said in the intro, so many people struggle to talk about sex, whereas it's something that I've always felt very natural around. So I wasn't sure how to get back into it, but I did a life coaching diploma because so many of my friends said, you're great with people, you're good at creating such a safe space, and you'd make a great life coach. So I did a 9-month coaching diploma, and a woman who I'd become friends with who was on that diploma, she came to me afterwards and said, what she actually said was, I'm turning 40. I have a finite number of shags left in me, which wasn't the case, but it's what she believed. And I feel I've never properly explored sex. And I need to get on with it. But there's no one who I can be comfortable talking to, even my husband. But I'd shared my background with her, and she said, because you were a striptease artist and all the other things that you did, you're not going to judge me or slut shame me. Can you combine what we've just learned on this diploma, all the different coaching methodologies and stuff, with your life experience and coach me around sex? So that was the light bulb moment for what I'm doing now. And that was 2019.
I mean, I think that's fascinating. What a journey. And, you've obviously got the experience because you were up there learning what your audience wanted back in, the decade that you were working in that industry. And now you've taken those skills and applied it in a different way to help people. I love that. I'm interested. What does a sex coach do? What if someone's listening to this? What sort of challenges or way? Tell me how that works. What topics do you cover? How does it work?
So as a coach, I help people who are ready and able to look forward and imagine a positive future and feel enthusiastic towards getting to that future. So I'm not a therapist. A therapist or counsellor will help you deal with trauma in the past that's stopping you moving forward. So as a coach, I'm helping people understand who they truly are sexually. So many people of all genders who I work with have been almost cosplaying what they think they should be as a heterosexual man, for example, or as a bisexual woman, copying what they've seen in film and TV, let alone porn. So often a first step is helping people get in touch with who they truly are. Then looking at what's working for them in their sex life, or what has been working, what isn't. If we get really honest about what would we rather never ever do again, for example, what do we want more of or less of, and then exploring the world of sexual possibility that's out there, because what we've been presented with in film, TV and porn is such a tiny proportion of what is out there. And then aligned with all of that are skills around communication, empathy, boundaries, consent, all of those skills that go into having a happy sex life.
Wow. I mean, just listening to you there, I guess a lot of the clients that I work with and have worked with over the years, they come to me during a breakup or after a breakup. A lot of them haven't had sex for quite a long time. It's not like they were having sex until the end and then that was it. A lot of people, their sex life fizzled out sometimes decades before the relationship ended. So going out there into the world thinking, well, yeah, great, but I don't want to get hurt. You've got all the feelings of, I don't want to get hurt again, that heartbreak, I don't want to go through that. I feel uncomfortable. I've had so many clients who are uncomfortable with the way they look now after having children. Even men find it very difficult, I think, as well, just to get back out there and be with a new partner, be naked around someone, have your confidence there. Even the dating process before you even get to that is very difficult. And I do a lot of work with clients about how to boost your confidence and date with safety nets. So if you do recognise some of the red flags maybe that you missed before, you learn those lessons, bank them before you start getting back out there again. But how would you, what's your advice for people in that situation when they just haven't had sex for a long time and it's all just a bit too daunting, so maybe they're just not going to go there because the fear's too big?
Well, what you just said about learning lessons and banking them, that applies to sex as well. We can, and I feel we should, spend a period of time looking back quite honestly at the sex that we've been having. Once we feel able to do that without any visceral charge around it, and learning lessons from that. But for most people who are going through breakups or certainly divorces now, particularly after long marriages, we're coming from a time when we didn't have anywhere near an adequate sex education. And so the first step for most people, I would say, is to give oneself that education that was missing. Typically, people are telling me that the sex that they've been having in relationships that they've left wasn't necessarily particularly enjoyable. That if I'm talking to a woman, something I'll hear again and again, I heard it literally yesterday, was sex was an act of service on my part. It was for my partner. It wasn't about my pleasure at all. And so typically many of us becoming single after a long relationship, we've not necessarily got any good sex to refer back to. Sex might have been something that had become filled with duty. It's for somebody else. Maybe it might have been physically painful, let alone if there's been abuse, domestic abuse. That's then addressing that is going into therapy rather than coaching. But for so many people, sex just hasn't been that pleasurable. And then when we're looking forward, as you say, to potentially going into another relationship with body confidence issues, concerns around aging, changing hormone levels, particularly if we're female, of course it's something which is going to be something to dread rather than to look forward to. And then once we're in that challenging and negative mindset, it is tricky to get out of that. So I guess the message there is you're totally normal and it's understandable if you are filled with a sense of dread around moving forward sexually.
And quite often libido just almost seems to disappear. I think clients say, well, I don't even want to have sex. It's not like I'm thinking about it. It's not even on my radar. I'm just trying to make sure that, I'm downsizing the house, or I'm looking after the kids, and I'm just trying to create an income stream. Like, it's the last thing on my mind. And getting into a new relationship terrifies me. Casual sex, that's scary. So I'll just not bother. Have you got any tips for that?
Well, we tend to expect sex and libido, the desire for sex, to exist in a separate box to the rest of our lives. That it just should be there. But actually it's very affected, our libido is very affected by stress. So for the majority of people, stress switches the libido off. As a sex coach, I work with what's called brakes and accelerators to libido, to desire. So our brakes are all of the things which switch us off from wanting sex. Or if we're having it anyway, from achieving as much pleasure as we could. And those brakes are individual for each person, but there will be ones that apply to most of us. So if we're tired, if we're stressed, if we're feeling bad about our body image, if we have lots of different people relying on us, so maybe children, older parents, co-workers, if we don't feel safe and secure in our home, all of these things are switching us off from wanting sex. So if a lot of that is happening, then it's natural and it's understandable that the body will switch off that desire. There's just not time for it. Then with our accelerators, these are the things which encourage us to want sex. And what we tend to think about when we're trying to increase our libido is those things. What's going to turn me on? And trying all of that, and it's not working because the brakes are on. So then we get stressed around, well, why don't I want sex? What's wrong with me? Will I never want it again? What if I get into a new relationship but I still don't want sex? And that in itself hits the brakes and stops our libido arising. So we create this kind of, or that sounds like we make it happen. What develops is this downward spiral of stress and worry about sex, about wanting it, about not wanting it, and that in itself shuts us down. So I would say if you're in that period of time where there really is you don't have any time for yourself, there's just stress, responsibilities to lots of people, that it's normal and natural that you don't have much of a libido. What to then tell yourself in that situation is this is not forever. So something that's incredibly joyful in my work is I work with so many people in their 50s, 60s, up to their 80s, who are exploring and enjoying sex in a way that they never have before. And particularly I like to tell women who are going through the perimenopause and menopause transition, who are feeling, well, this is it for me now. This is the end of my sex life. That it absolutely isn't the end. So through our lives, there's an ebb and flow of desire. So maybe in our past relationship, things were good at times, things were bad at times. Maybe we might have had a fertility journey that affected our relationship with sex, and then small children. And there's this ebb and flow. And if divorce, midlife, all correspond, we can think, well, this is it now. But actually, it's just an ebb. And I've seen again and again and again as a coach that there can be a massive flow again afterwards. So just remember, the stage you're in now is not forever.
So I think it's great to understand that and get that clarity and the reassurance that it isn't forever, because I think you do tend to assume that what you're dealing with now is how it's going to be. So you talked about accelerators. Can you give us a few examples of what people listening could do if they want to move from that stage? They're ready, but they don't know how to sort of get those accelerators going. How would you do that?
Well, what I'd suggest each person listening who wants to try that does is, if you imagine having, say, 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon entirely free of responsibilities. So for some people, this might seem like a wild fantasy, but go with it. You've got 3 or 4 hours where you can switch your phone off. Know that everybody who needs care in your life is safe and cared for. And it's time to devote to having a positive sexual experience just with yourself. Or you could imagine an ideal fantasy future partner and think, well, what would that encompass? And when I do this with clients, often they'll say, well, first of all, I would just want to have a bath and just switch off and daydream for a while. And it's these kind of setup parts. It's about relaxing, reducing stress, before we then start to think about any kind of arousal, because that relaxation comes first. And then for each person, the accelerators can be very unique. So some people are aroused by visuals. And it's not just the case that heterosexual men like visuals and women don't so much. So it might be, if you're a very visual person, that you want to watch some ethical adult erotica. It might be you like reading. It might be you like listening. There's all sorts of fantastic audio erotica, typically slanted towards women. It might be that you have a rich erotic fantasy imagination. What works for you to gently turn you on is very much about being in a space also of safety where you feel physically comfortable. Now, if we're solo, then we can arrange that more easily sometimes than when we're partnered. But what is it specifically for you that allows you to feel arousal? So something that I think it's beneficial for everybody to do is to make a list of their personal breaks and their personal accelerators. So you can just grab a sheet of paper and divide it in two. And then think about what can you do to reduce the pressure on the breaks. So you've got your list of breaks. Which are the biggest breaks? Circle those. What can you do, if anything, at this point in your life to reduce the pressure off the breaks? And what can you do to increase the focus on the accelerators? So there's a simple little coaching exercise.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of my clients coming out of relationships, one of the things that I feel is that self-care and focusing on themselves, giving themselves like 3 hours to focus on something like this, is they have a guilt around it, a guilt of, spending time on their own or anything like this. Anything maybe even sexual might make them feel a bit guilty. Should I not be doing this? Is it better to be doing this with someone, but I don't want to find somebody? How do you hear that from people as well? Because I hear guilt is a big issue for many clients.
Hey, it's Sara here. Just to remind you that we have 3 online support groups where you can find your tribe and get coaching support from my elite team coaches to help you with any kind of breakup, divorce, separation, toxic relationship breakdown. Get your questions answered and get the boost you need. Also, if you'd like to join our coaching community and turn your pain into your superpower and become a breakup and divorce coach with us, then you can also find the details on my website, saradavison.com. We look forward to seeing you soon.
So I hear guilt is a big issue for many clients.
I'm not literally suggesting that people find those 3 or 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon, because that can be hard to do, but it's more a thought exercise. So where it has come from is I hear again and again and again, typically from women I'm coaching in relationships currently, I don't want sex. But what they don't want is the kind of sex they've been having. And when I say to them, imagine you had this time, they will find that they can describe a scenario. So as I say, if they're partnered, they can describe a scenario. Well, first of all, I'd have an hour to myself. I don't even want him involved. I'd have a bath, this and that. And then I'd have him, we'd just cuddle and we'd talk, and then he'd wash my back in the shower, and then. And they find they can describe a sexual scenario they want. So it's not that they don't want sex. Right. It's that the environment that they're in and maybe the way that their partner's initiating and the things that he's doing just aren't working for them. Yeah. So it's a thought exercise of, well, actually, I could want it if I had it entirely on my own terms. Yeah. Okay. I mean, if somebody can actually find a few hours, then great, but it's meant as a thought exercise. But then, in terms of guilt, I think this comes from the conditioning that we have around sex, particularly as women, that it should be about someone else's pleasure, that it can only, that we're only allowed pleasure. And this might mean pleasure way beyond sex, when we've made sure everybody else is okay, when the to-do list is done, when we've done the housework, when. I hear again and again, it's at the bottom of the list, and I never feel that I've done enough to deserve it. So there's guilt there. There can be a lot of shame and guilt simply around being a sexual person. Again, typically women. I know your podcast isn't only focused on women. And kind of self-censoring around that as well. If we're a parent, it might be that we feel we're not allowed to be sexual. Maybe we feel drawn in our very, very private sexual fantasy world towards themes or acts that we don't think can exist alongside with us being parents. And so all of these things makes us want to shut down. And if we do start thinking about it, this guilt comes in. Whereas typically we see when people are having good sex that they are more relaxed, more expansive in their thinking, more creative in their thinking, better able to empathize with others, more generous. Lots and lots of positives can come with having a great sex life. So it's a real shame that for so many people, guilt can stop them getting there.
Absolutely. I think you're right. A lot of people are just generally exhausted from divorce, breakups, kids, managing all the stress and pressure. And like you said, stress just can turn off the desire to want to even have any intimacy. You just want to get into bed and watch a movie, maybe not do anything else, just collapse. So again, I mean, I see, and it's really, really good advice you're giving there, and shining a light on things. I think it's really important, so that it's not you, it's normal. This is what happens, especially if you're under a lot of stress, as I know a lot of my listeners are. Then another thing I hear is when you get out there into the dating world, whether there was a whole thing, I haven't seen it so much recently, but a few years back, where a lot of my clients were dating much younger men. And what they were finding was that the way that the younger men were having sex was very different to the way they were used to in their relationship. It was a lot more sort of like gymnastics in the bedroom rather than, maybe something that they'd been used to with a partner which wasn't as adventurous. And that was terrifying some of them, and some of them were loving it, so everybody has their own sort of experience on that. And I know that you listened to my podcast with Stacey Dogood, and she talks about all sorts of things that she experimented with afterwards, younger men and sex parties and things like that. Some of my audience find that shocking, and others think, yeah, sign me up, where do I go? Everybody's different, and there's no judgment here. You've got to follow your own path, I think, be true to yourself. But it is sometimes, the expectations of what a partner might want and what you're able to deliver is something that holds people back. So how do you work with that?
Well, first of all, I'd say develop your own self-knowledge and learn who you are sexually, what you want to explore, what your boundaries are. Now, part of this can involve looking back at your past sexual relationship or relationships, and being really honest with yourself. What were you doing that you rather would not have been doing? What was working for you? We can go through a whole kind of process of analysis when we're ready of that past relationship or relationships. And ideally write these things down to help you get clear. Go on your own kind of journey of exploration yourself before you get anywhere near a new partner, in terms of learning about what's out there. So this will come through reading, listening to podcasts about sex, watching documentaries. A book that I've been recommending recently is Gillian Anderson's Want, Anthology of Female Sexual Fantasies. Explore as much as possible what's out there and be honest about what you're curious about and what's turning you on. Because as soon as we're in a new relationship, we naturally start thinking also about, what does our partner want? How can we be a good partner to them? And I think it's so healthy before that to try to get clear on, well, hang on, what do I actually want? And then when we go into a new relationship, rather than it being all about, well, what do they want? How energetic do they want it? As you've said, this trend, which is very much still in full force, of older women dating younger men. Rather than being about what do they want and how do I fit into that, it's about, well, what do I want? And how do I communicate that and express that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about working out your boundaries as well and what you feel comfortable with. But then I think what you touched on there was like that experimentation. You have that time to go do it. What kind of options do people have? Because if you've been in quite a traditional relationship, some of my clients have only been with one or two people their entire lives. You come out, the world's massively changed in the last 3-4 decades. What can people do? What are the options on the table, I guess?
Well, you are your own kind of most important sexual partner. The common denominator across every sexual experience that you have had and will ever have is you and your body. So if you feel you don't fully understand how arousal works for you, what your brakes and accelerators are, how your body works. So if you don't have a masturbation practice, if you've never experimented with sex toys, and there are toys now for every gender, not just women, if you've not experimented with different sensations on your body, with watching adult erotica, listening, reading, all of those things, that is the starting point before you even begin to think about going out to sex parties or anything like that. And there's so much to explore in that regard. Now, we mentioned guilt earlier. People can have huge amounts of guilt about self-pleasure. and about masturbation. And for a lot of people, whatever body we have, if we have been doing it, it's been a case of do it as fast as possible and quietly. And I was going to say strongly urge, but that's not vehement enough. I would very strongly urge everybody to take more time around masturbation and really learn about what works for your body. Now, we have different bodies to those we had in our teens. So a lot of people will stop masturbating when they're in a relationship because it feels wrong in some kind of way. And so before you start looking outside of your own bedroom, experiment as much as you can within your own bedroom. But then beyond that, I very much think that sex ideally is something that we talk about more than people typically talk about it, and almost develop a sense of community around. And what I mean by that is attending online workshops about sex, book groups that are discussing erotica. The more we can, instead of keeping it as this very, very private and secretive thing amongst ourselves, the more we can kind of broaden that and learn from each other. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean ringing up your friend who you've never talked about sex with before and saying, hey, I've found this amazing new sex toy or whatever. No, but just carefully trying to expand our kind of horizon beyond just this very secretive thing. Potentially going to in-person workshops. There's an amazing book. Am I allowed to recommend certain books?
Sure, yeah.
So there's a book called Love Me, One Woman's Search for a Happily Ever After by Marianne Power, in which she talks about her kind of personal sexual awakening in her 40s. And in that, she describes Tantra workshops that she's been on, in a way that's incredibly accessible to someone who knows nothing about Tantra, but also you learn so much just reading about her experiences. But if somebody has the money, time and inclination going to events like that in person, where you're not actually having sex with anyone, but you're learning to tune into your sexual energy, to your boundaries, to your yes and your no. An increasing number of people do explore sex parties, such as Killing Kittens, which is the biggest kind of female run and female directed sex party experience. Over half the people at big Killing Kittens parties are not there to, or the couples are not there to have sex with other couples. It's a misconception that if you step through those doors, you are in any way obligated, or that there's a heavy expectation that you're going to rip your clothes off and jump on a bed or do the things that Stacey Dogood described. Lots of people are there just to watch, to learn, and to enjoy, or they're curious about being in that sexual space. And for me, I say, if you want a body confidence boost, and if you want to just be wowed and kind of awed at the diversity of human sexual pleasure out there, then go to one of these parties. Even if you just go once to one of them. As I say, in terms of body confidence boost, when you see people of such diverse ages, body shapes, body sizes, having this wonderful sexual time, it can be incredibly liberating.
Well, I mean, I've had so many clients that have wanted to go there and have that on their bucket list. So definitely something that comes up in coaching sessions for sure. So, okay, so I agree with that. So doing the work on yourself to learn the lessons and figure out what you want from a relationship with somebody before you get into a relationship. But then when you're in one, how do you broach the subject? Because a lot of people never talk to their ex about sex. It was just something that happened, and it was never really discussed much, apart from, was that okay? You okay? That's it. It was never discussed. So now going into a new relationship and wanting to discuss that or explain what you want, how do people go about that?
Starting to talk about sex is part of creating a whole new pattern of behaviour around sex. And there is a big opportunity here. If you're single at the moment, and you do know that at some point in the future you do want a sexual relationship with someone else. So as I say, hopefully you're having a sexual relationship with yourself. But going forward, it is a massive opportunity. Sometimes I coach women who are in new relationships who want coaching because they'll say the same patterns are repeating themselves. It's like I'm with my ex again, and this is not what I want. And in order not for that to happen, we need to go through this process, as I mentioned, of kind of almost analysing that past relationship, spotting the patterns. So from how was sex initiated, and from that point where it was clear that that's what was going to happen, what steps then happened? What were the patterns? What did you find yourself thinking? Oh, I'm not aroused enough. Oh, I'm taking too long. So, oh, it would be better if I fake pleasure because I don't want to let him down, because then there'll be a conversation. Typically, there's patterns that we fall into that repeat and repeat and repeat. So identifying what they were, and how to break those patterns is part of having a happy sexual future going forward. And as you've just said, communicating, talking about it. I think the first step for this is to acknowledge to each other how bizarre it is that we can't talk about it. We talk about pretty much everything else. And that in itself, to say it's bizarre we don't talk about it, it would be great if we could talk about it. And to say, I feel embarrassed, I feel awkward, to share that, and typically our partner will share the same thing back. That's just the starting point. And then from there, it can be very, very helpful, particularly initially, to discuss a kind of third-party piece of content. So something you've read, something you've listened to. I have a very short TEDx talk called Revamp Your Sex Life in 6 minutes, that's had almost 3.5 million views. And I've had so many emails and messages from couples all around the world saying, we've never talked about sex, but your TEDx talk appeared in the feed. Typically one of them will have watched it and said, wow, it's so relatable, so relaxed, and so positive, that I said to my partner, let's watch this together. And then they discussed the talk. That can be a lovely roundabout route, because even unless you're an incredibly sexually liberated, positive sexual couple, to sit down opposite each other at the kitchen table or wherever and say, let's talk about our sex life, can feel very challenging. But to say, well, let's read this thing, or let's watch this thing, and then we talk about that thing, is much more helpful. And then what you will find, another starting point, listening to podcasts about sex, because a lot of us, we might not know how to pronounce certain words, what words to even use for certain bits of the body. We might never have said them out loud or heard them out loud. And listening to podcasts about sex helps normalize that. And then gradually, the more we talk about it, even if it's excruciatingly difficult at first, the more we talk about it, the easier and easier it gets. Very often people at the start of a relationship find it easier to talk. But a pattern that I hear about is, at the start we were talking about sex, we were playful, we were trying new things, but we've only been together 8-9 months, and suddenly we're into the routines that I was in with my ex. So keep talking about it. I mean, it's great I recommend relationship MOTs. So once a month or once every 3 months, talking through everything, including the difficult topics, finances, etc., and personal hygiene, all sorts, and have sex as part of that, so that we don't fall back into these negative patterns.
Yeah, I think communication in any relationship is key. And I think, I've seen so many people who have good communication on everything but their sex life, and that is just not on the table. And I think a lot of my clients, a lot of them have been survivors of domestic abuse relationships, and And I think they are people pleasers. And then one of the patterns that I've seen time and time again is that they will fake orgasms so that their partner feels happy, but they're not, and then they can't get out of that loop. Have you got any advice specifically for that?
I love that you've asked this for your specific audience, because it's so much easier for me to answer than when it's related to people who are still in a relationship. So my advice for you going forward would be to pledge to yourself that you are not going to fake it again, because you've seen yourself where that leads. And a very personal share here, I had been somebody who had fallen into that people pleasing. I would find in the first few months of a new relationship, orgasms were happening and it was all good, but then maybe there would just be one time, this is before I became a sex coach and knew everything I knew now, where it wasn't really working for me, but I would think, oh, he'll think there's something wrong if I don't orgasm, and there isn't anything wrong, he's doing everything right, it's my fault, I'd start feeling bad, so I'll fake it just this once because I don't want to have a conversation about why didn't I, and I don't want him feeling bad. And then once you've done it once, it gets more and more tempting to do it again and again. And as you've said, then you're in a downward spiral where he thinks it's working. At what point do you say, well, it's not working? And if somebody is still in that relationship, then it is challenging to break that cycle. It's absolutely possible. But yeah, personal share. When I got together with my husband, there was a huge amount at stake for both of us in going into this new relationship, and we wanted to make damn sure we got it right. And as part of that, I actually told him that I had faked in past relationships. And when it became clear that things were turning sexual between us, and I said, oh, I've got goosebumps talking about it. I said, I don't want that to happen again. I desperately don't want that to happen. And I promised myself and I promised him that I wouldn't do that. And I said, that does mean at times I might not orgasm. I might not be able to explain why I haven't. I don't even know how long I might take. And kind of confessing that was incredibly intimate. And it allowed me, those first few times that I was thinking, okay, well, it would be easier just now to fake it, to not fake it and to say, this isn't really working, or this isn't happening. So if you feel at all able to say to your new partner, I used to do this and I don't want to do it again, that is one way forward. If you don't feel able to say that, just to pledge within yourself. Now, if you're moving through midlife in this breakup, that actually gives you an opportunity. Whatever our gender, our bodies are changing. How long it takes to get aroused, how orgasm happens or doesn't happen, that's all changing in midlife. So that's an opportunity to say, I'm in this kind of learning process, rewiring process, and through we need to be able to communicate, and I think to take some of the pressure off, that orgasm doesn't have to be a be-all and end-all. Sex doesn't have to be this very goal-focused activity, the success of which is judged for any of us, whatever body parts we have, purely on whether or not we orgasm. Because I do coach people who are orgasming with their partner, but for whom sex is very dissatisfying.
Okay. Interesting. I think everything you're saying is fascinating. I think a lot of my audience, people that my client base, that we tend to be very empathetic people pleasers. That's, the victim survivors of any form of abuse, whether it's coercive, controlling or violence. You have to be able to get into and tolerate at the beginning of those relationships. It's very much self-sacrifice, putting everybody else first. And I think, that often I see as one of the issues that comes up when we're talking, and one of the reasons why people don't want to get into relationships. So it's that self-care part, which is, on a general level, putting yourself first and, being afraid to say this isn't working, or I'm not happy with this, or this isn't, you know, having those what are difficult conversations. I think that's the challenge, and it's really refreshing to hear you talking about that communication and how we can build it in, and some tips to be able to bring that into everyday communication. I think it's really important. And you're right, the relationships where that is on the table and people are discussing it, you can see there's a different level of energy, and that, you know, so it is a great thing to aim for and to work towards, because that communication just opens up so many other opportunities to have that fulfilling relationship with your partner where you truly are happy, you know, and everyone deserves that opportunity. And it's, you know, if we can open up that conversation, that communication, it's definitely possible, which is great. So, I mean, gosh, you've shared so much, Ruth, today. Thank you so much. I mean, it's been amazing chatting and listening to your story and your advice. Where can people find you for help and support? Where can they follow you?
My website is ruthramsay.com, and Ramsay is AY at the end. And I offer everything from one-to-one and couples coaching through to short online courses, through to one-off workshops. I have a workshop called Moving On from a Sexual Breakup that I tend to do once or twice a year, depending on demand. And that's the information is on the website, but in order to learn what's coming up, sign up for my Saturday morning email, which is called Something for the Weekend. And it comes out at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. And the intention with it is that each weekend there's something in there for you to think about or learn about, a question to ask yourself, a very simple coaching exercise, but something that can help make your sex life better weekend after weekend. And it's not just for people who have partners. As I've said a few times, our key sexual relationship is with ourselves. And people tell me that they look forward every Saturday morning to opening that email and reading it. And it's a way of keeping sex front of mind. As we've talked about a lot in the last 40 minutes, when you're busy, when you're stressed, there's so many other things going on. It's easy to lose interest and to push sex to one side, but it's good just to keep it in our minds. So you can sign up for that on my website, Something for the Weekend. And that's just a gentle, quick way, just week by week, of keeping the topic ticking over in your mind and learning some tips and tricks as well.
Brilliant. Well, I suggest everyone heads over to sign up for your weekly newsletter. I love that. One last question, Ruth, that everybody gets asked on my podcast. So my podcast is called Heartbreak to Happiness. What is happiness for you, Ruth?
Happiness for me, let's think, both if we're thinking sexually, but wider than that, is having the freedom to be myself and express myself, and the confidence to make the most of that freedom to be myself and express myself.
I love that. And I think freedom is a topic that resonates strongly with a lot of my listeners as well. So thank you so much for coming on, and thank you, Ruth, for being a fabulous guest.
It's been my pleasure.
That's it for today's episode. Do like, subscribe, follow, and all that lovely stuff. And I look forward to seeing you on my next episode.
That's it for today's episode of Heartbreak to Happiness. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review to win a free ticket to Sara's virtual Heartbreak to Happiness retreat. This is a transformative combination of live webinars with Sara herself, coupled with her empowering online video program designed to help you cope better with your breakup and start feeling happy again. Thank you, and join us again on the next episode for another dose of Heartbreak to Happiness.